Hey everyone. So I'm kind of new at Zooming and teaching over Zoom, so just bear with me. I hope everyone's doing well and feeling better and staying well and all of that. I wanted to go over with you our lesson from this morning on August 24th at 8 o'clock. So I'm going to share my screen and there's a PowerPoint on it and I'm going to teach the lesson and that'll get you caught up with what we did today. So I'll start doing that. So hopefully you're seeing my screen, which starts with this page, organizing a memoir. Okay, so what we're talking about today is organizing the memoir, and we organize the memoir in what's called a dramatic arc, and so that's what this lecture is about today. So this memoir that you're going to be writing for me, it's not your typical essay, all right? It's not your typical essay. It's informal in structure, so there's no set number of paragraphs. So if you're used to writing a 5-paragraph essay, I can just tell you it will not work for this one. And sometimes with informal structure, some paragraphs are short, as in one sentence. Some paragraphs are kind of long. It just depends on the information that you're trying to convey in that paragraph. Language is also informal, so contractions are okay in this essay because you want your reader to feel like they're living this experience you're writing about with you. So you want to be as real in the way you're speaking to the reader as possible. So things like contraction is okay. Some slang is even okay, but you've got to make sure your audience would understand the slang. So, I mean, like, take me, for instance. I put, let me see if I can annotate on here. Zoom has some cool features. I don't understand them all. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, so if you see here, I kind of make this point here. You got to consider like me. I'm one of your audience, and I'm one of your readers, and I call myself a basic white woman teacher. But you have to also have to understand while I work with college students daily. Outside of my job, my worldview is really, just around little kids. I have small children, so I'm not really up to date on teenage lingo or anything like that. But I can tell you about all episodes of Marvel, Avengers, and Sesame Street if you care to ever want to test my knowledge there. But in other words, I know that your age group has certain slang terms and cool terms and stuff like that. I may or may not understand them, so it's okay to use them, but just make sure you clarify what they are in the writing. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide, is how do I know when to start a new paragraph? This is a really tough challenge for a lot of freshman writers because oftentimes this is what gets us is, I don't know when to end a paragraph and when to start a new one. And if we don't know when to end the paragraph and start a new one, our paragraphs often can be too long. They just have too much information for one paragraph. And so the organization of your essay is going to be way off and it's not going to be a real easy story to read. So I say you start by following the dramatic arc structure. Now that's just a start. We're going to go over those parts of the dramatic arc. To see a copy of the dramatic arc, go to Canvas, look in week 2, and you're going to see a handout. It's going to say dramatic arc PDF or something like that, and you'll see what a dramatic arc looks like. It has like a flat line on the left, and then it curves upward, and then it has a flat line on the right. All right, so look at that image, and then you'll know what I'm talking about. But start by following the dramatic arc structure. You may need to break your paragraphs up even more, especially in the exposition, rising action, and falling action. So the dramatic arc has several parts to it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how many paragraphs you need. You may need more. Some of the parts of your dramatic arc may need multiple paragraphs instead of just one. General rule of thumb, as time shifts in your story, you want to start with a new paragraph. So for example, you might say, say I said, okay, at 8 o'clock this morning, I took roll in class, okay? Well, I don't have anything else to detail there, right? So I might talk about something else that happened later in class. So I might say 15 minutes later, I realized that Zoom was not going to work to have a live Zoom session. Okay, it doesn't really, I didn't detail what happened between 8 and 8:15. I didn't need to. It wasn't that important to the story. But what I would do is a paragraph, I might have a 1-sentence paragraph. At 8 o'clock this morning, I took roll. Next paragraph, 15 minutes later, you see the time shifted to 15 minutes. 15 minutes later, I realized Zoom wasn't going to work for my live session. All right, which, sorry about that, guys, really. Okay, there was some technical difficulty. I found out that Zoom was not working nationwide, but also my computer was supposed to have been set up with Zoom, and it wasn't. So there was supposed to be a person that was to come help me, and that person never came. So by Wednesday, we will have all this worked out, and you should be able to come on into the Zoom session without any problems, at least from my end. Okay. All right. But as time shifts in your story, start a new paragraph. Okay. So anytime you see those transitions where the time moves a little bit, that means that needs to be your first sentence of your next paragraph. All right, so the parts of the dramatic arc. All right, so the dramatic arc works like this. The first part is the exposition. If you're looking at the handout in Canvas, you can follow along. The first part's the exposition. The second part is the rising action. The third part is the climax. The fourth part is the falling action. And the last part and fifth part is the resolution. Now that looks like 5 paragraphs, right? But it's not, because like rising action is likely going to have multiple paragraphs within it. Falling action may have multiple, exposition may have multiple paragraphs. So, but start with that structure in mind, okay? That's how you form the story, and it keeps you from giving anything away. It keeps those key features intact. So your key features, remember, are a good story, vivid details, and significance. So the exposition kind of helps, the exposition organization helps keep those 3 key features in mind. Okay, so the exposition is the first part. It takes 1 to 2 paragraphs to write a good exposition. Now your essay is going to be a total of 2 to 4 pages double spaced. So if your exposition goes over 2 paragraphs, you've got too much exposition and you need to cut it back. Longer memoirs, you might have a really long, a whole lot of paragraphs of exposition, but not this one. You got to cut to the chase. What the exposition does is it sets the scene of the story. So it provides the appropriate background information. For example, who? In Rick Bragg's All Over But the Shouting essay that you read for today, who was involved? His dad and him, right? Those were the 2 people involved in the story. Those are the 2 people who were together in this story. So he tells you about his father. He tells you about himself at the beginning. What? Okay, for instance, what brought Rick Bragg there? Well, his father is sick and dying. His father is at death's door. So we know that from the beginning. When did this happen? Well, we don't know exactly the date and the time and things like that. And sometimes we don't, and we don't need to, but we know Rick Bragg is an adult. Okay, we know he's an adult, and his father is an old man, and we know that they've been estranged for a long period of time, and Rick Bragg is coming to see his father before he dies. So we know those things. Where did it happen? In the first sentence, Jacksonville, Alabama. Okay, so he gives us a very specific where. Sometimes you get the why in the exposition, not always, and even sometimes you get how, the question how, but not always. But generally, your appropriate background information is going to cover the who, what, when, and where. Again, don't feel pressured. The where can be as specific as Jacksonville, Alabama, or it could be like, okay, at my house, or something like that. So it doesn't have to be just ultra specific if it's not that important to the story. The when, I'm not asking you to say on August 24th, 2020, I was quarantined, but you might say at the beginning of the school year, I had to be quarantined due to COVID exposure, right? So the when, like I said, these don't have to be just intricately detailed unless it is important to the story. Okay. So I'm going to move on. So exposition again, just a reminder, 1 to 2 paragraphs is good. Rising action is the second part of the dramatic arc. This is the good part, all right? These are the events leading up to the climax, which is the main event, okay? You really got to stay in chronological order. The reader doesn't need to know what happened yet because you didn't know what was going to happen at the time either when you were living this event. So take us back through the events leading up to the main event in your story and relive them as if you didn't know it was going to happen yet. The rising action walks your reader through the situation. This is the goal, okay? Walking your reader through the situation. You want to make your reader feel like they are living this moment alongside you, okay? The reader wants to feel like they are there, all right? And the way you do it is you're building up each action by itself, on top of itself until the main event happens. Suspense is built with the rising action. So the example I want to give you is an example I actually gave in class today, and it's a good one. And a student just like you wrote this essay several years ago, and he wanted to write about when his baby boy was born because there was a lot of excitement around this new baby. And he started out with his exposition that he was in high school, he played football, and he had gotten his girlfriend pregnant. And rather than being down in the dumps about it, he had decided, you know what, I'm going to support my girlfriend. There's a reason I'm going to be a father, and I want to embrace that reason, and I want to be the best father for this child. And he thought he detailed that his girlfriend was expecting a baby boy, so he was especially excited at the idea of becoming a father to a son because it meant he could pass his love of football down to his son. And so where most people were buying this, where most people were getting ready for this new baby by buying little clothes and diapers and toys, this student, the writer of this essay, he bought his son a football. Okay, and he couldn't wait, and he was going to bring that football up to the hospital and give it to him, even though he knew that baby wouldn't be able to play catch with him. It was just the whole symbolism behind it, the importance of I get to pass something I love down to my son. So that was his exposition. Well, then as the months continued in the girlfriend's pregnancy, she was having some complications with her pregnancy. She had gotten gestational diabetes. She had, she had been bedridden. She had to take bed rest for a little while because she wasn't well enough to get up and care for herself and the baby. And one night in the middle of the night, this writer got a call that she was in labor. The problem was it was a month before the baby was due. And so there's a lot of risk associated with having a baby so early. And so the student, he rushed around, he got out of bed and he rushed around and he went to go pick up his girlfriend to take her to the hospital. And he was terrified. And he was terrified something was going to happen to his son and something was going to happen to his girlfriend. And he was just determined, to get them to the hospital as quickly as he could. Of course, they lived an hour from the hospital in Starkville. So they decided, so he sped all the way to the hospital, and in the meantime his girlfriend was in the passenger seat crying and she was in intense pain, and he was really worried about her. And he finally got her to the hospital and they got her in a delivery room. But then her blood pressure went way up, and the baby's heart rate went down, and it was pretty life-threatening. And the doctor told him, okay, you're going to have to step out. We're going to have to deliver this baby by C-section. You can't be in here. And so the student left his girlfriend, and he was scared to death. And in the meantime, he had brought the football with him to the hospital because he was like, in all the chaos and stuff, he did not forget that present because that was the thing he was so excited to present to his son. And he said, even in the worst of this moment, I could still give my son a football. But when his girlfriend had to be delivered by operation, he got really terrified, and he was pacing the halls, holding the football, and just praying to God that he would save his girlfriend and save his baby. And he realized in the moment he really loved both of them, and he didn't want anything to happen to either one of them. And he had been so excited about being a father for the first time, despite how young he was. When he got out of the it felt like hours, but it was just a couple of minutes that passed by when the baby was delivered. And once everything was okay, a doctor walked out and he said, okay, everything's finished and you have a beautiful baby girl. And that was where the rising action stops and the climax begins. You see, when the writer wrote this story, he knew he was writing about his daughter. I mean, he's been raising this little girl for a couple of years now, but he wanted to bring the reader back to the way he lived it. You see, up until her birth, he thought he was having a son, okay? He didn't think he was having a daughter. So he made the reader also believe he was having a son. And so the suspense is built. We think what's going to happen is something's going to happen to the baby being born a month early. Something's going to happen to the girlfriend having to go through the emergency C-section. And then really what happens is, oh, baby's not a boy, it's a girl. Okay, so think about that. When you're living your story, when you're writing your story, take the reader back to where you were at that time and really write the experience, word for word, what you remember happening. And then the suspense will be built that way. Don't give anything away before it's too soon. So chronological order, that's a way of telling it in chronological order. But don't just start with, my baby girl, I thought she was a boy back then. No, don't tell me she's a girl, because you didn't know at that time she was a girl. Wait till it's time for you to find out it's a girl. Okay, and that brings us to the climax. You have a baby girl, okay? And that's the main event, okay? So the climax is kind of serves like your thesis statement, but we don't call it a thesis statement in memoir writing. We call it a climax, and that's at the top of the arc, okay? That highest peak of the arc, of the dramatic arc, if you're looking at that handout. So this is the main event. There's an element of surprise to the climax, okay? The reader shouldn't really see it coming, all right? They may say something else coming, but instead it's this. A successful climax depends on how you craft your rising action. So the climax of my student's story is that it was a baby girl. In Rick Bragg's essay, All Over But the Shoutin', the climax is kind of toward the middle a little bit, where he realizes his father is finally trying to be a father to him, okay? So the rising action kind of details how his father is dying, and he doesn't like watching his father look like that, because that's not how he remembered his dad. But we also get a sense of the hurt that his father has inflicted on the family by abandoning them, by putting himself ahead of his family, by not providing for them. We also know that Rick Bragg it's not just Rick Bragg he hurt, but he hurt Rick Bragg's mother by abandoning them. He hurt Rick Bragg's brothers by abandoning them. And we know the brothers have not come to see the father. So we know they are hurting too by being absent from the story. Okay, so all of this rising action, and you think this is going to be a story where Rick Bragg finally lets loose on his father and says, look, you sorry son of a gun, you have hurt us, and he's finally going to get his redemption, and he's finally going to say everything he's wanted to say to his father all these years for being so, for being so careless with that family. But it's the climax that changes it. My father is trying to be a father, and then the falling. And so you're going, wait, so the father is trying to be a good man. Okay, I didn't see that coming. All right, so that brings us to the falling action. The falling action is the aftermath. It's what happens as a result of the climax. This part is likely not as long as the rising action. So when you look at the dramatic arc, it can look a little misleading because you think all the parts have to be the same length because they're really cute and perfectly balanced on the sheet itself, but they don't, okay? So the rising action may be much longer than the falling action. So don't feel pressured to add stuff that doesn't belong there. So the aftermath is what happens as a result of the climax. So in my student story about his baby girl, we learn Baby girl is perfectly healthy. She's just a month early and really small. She had to be in the ICU for a couple of days just because she was so young. His girlfriend ended up being fine once she had the baby. She kind of returned to normal. Um, you know, and he still gifted that baby girl with the football, because he decided, you know what, I can play catch with my girl just as well as I could have with my boy. And he decided, and also, regardless of what kind of baby it was, boy or girl, he still had an immense love for this child and his girlfriend. So that's the aftermath. In Rick Bragg's story, after we learn father's trying to be a father, this is where father asks Rick to tell him about the guy on the baseball team who clocked him one, and did Rick get him back? Did Rick hit him back? And Rick says, oh yeah, and also we learn his father had been collecting books for Rick all these years, boxes and boxes of books, and had them to give to him. In other words, he took a real, even though he wasn't an involved father in Rick's life, he knew one thing about Rick Bragg, and that's that Rick liked to read and write. And so he invested in that, in Rick, and he bought some books, some old used books, because he thought his son would like them. And he recognized Rick had an interest, just like a father would, in his son. And he kind of played into that interest, which is kind of surprising for a father who was not involved in his children's lives and was an estranged father for much of their lives. But he was able to pick up that Rick, one, had something happen to him at school years before, like a fight, and he was able to ask about that. But then also he was able to play into something his son was interested in, and by buying the box of books for him. And so that's the falling action. And that comes to the resolution. That's the final piece of the puzzle in a memoir. How is the conflict in the story resolved? Well, in Rick Bragg's story, it's not necessarily that the conflict is resolved. Of course, the conflict is the hard feelings that Rick Bragg feels towards his estranged dad, and how he really, really wants to give him a piece of his mind, but then he sees his dad on the bed dying, and he looks so weak and pitiful, and he can't bring himself to do it, to tell him off. But then he really can't bring himself to tell him off when his father gifts him with all those books, and actually, tries to earnestly talk to him and make up for time lost. And so he can't totally forgive his dad, because just because he got a box of books and his dad's about to die, he still doesn't want to totally forgive him, because he doesn't want to be at odds with his mother and brothers. But at the same time, he knows now his dad's not the monster he had always made him out to be, or always thought he was. And so his feelings at the end are somewhere between forgiveness and anger. He's able to let go of some of the anger, but not all of it. And he's able to forgive a little bit, but not entirely. And so it's a complicated resolution for Rick Bragg. But the emotions, remember I don't know if you remember last week, but when we were talking about the significance, that third key feature of the essay, emotions really need to come out in this story, okay, throughout. But in the resolution, really detail the emotions that you have experienced with the story. And in Rick Bragg's case, it was complicated because he did forgive him, but then he was still angry too. And he was somewhere in between the two feelings. And it was important, you got in that last paragraph, it was important for Rick Bragg to write this story and to write it down and to share it, because of course we know a lot of families have complications like this, and a lot of relationships and families are pretty complex. So he was able to really capture the complexity of this relationship with his father pretty well, in a way that's relatable, because we know a lot of family relationships are complex. You need to be very heavy on the autobiographical significance in a resolution. For example, this might have been a lesson you learned. This might have been, who are you because this happened, and how this moment has shaped you. What do you realize about this moment? Of all the stories you told on yourself, why this story? What does it mean to you? And of course, most importantly, don't be trite. Trite is a word I went over with the class today. If you don't know what I mean by this word, I can tell you 100% of the people who were in class today did not know it either. Trite means cliche or overdone, to the point that it's uninteresting. So if you've told me this really great story and then just end with, well, I learned not to take things for granted. Yeah, that's what everybody learns in a lessons learned story. But instead of saying what you learned, show what you learned. For instance, Rick Bragg doesn't say, I realized I'm angry and not angry at the same time. No, he illustrates it by saying, I'm somewhere between anger and forgiveness. I want to be, I don't want to totally forgive because I don't want to betray my mom and brothers, but at the same time, I think my dad's trying here, really trying here, and I can't ignore that. And so he's able to really show that moment. And so that's what you want to do, is you want to show the moment. Don't be trite. Don't be cliche. If you say things like, oh, God, I learned to put God first after this. Well, if you haven't been religious this whole essay and you haven't talked about God this whole essay, God doesn't need to come out in the resolution either. It won't fit. It just looks like it'd be tacked on. So try with the significance. The way you convey really good autobiographical significance is to really just detail the emotions experienced as this thing happened and even after it's happened. In Malala's essay, in Who is Malala, she does it very differently than Rick Bragg. For instance, her climax is at the very end of the essay, where Rick Bragg's is towards the middle. But Malala's is at the very end of the essay, where where the title of the essay comes out, where the guard with the gun comes in and says, comes on the bus and says, who is Malala? And that's the climax. Okay. And it's like in the last paragraph or second to last paragraph. And something's about to change for her when that is uttered. Who is Malala? And it's so important she made it the title of her essay. But the climax is there. And then the falling action, well, there's not a whole lot of falling action, because as soon as she identifies herself as Malala, what happens to her? She gets shot in the head 3 times, right? And then but here's her resolution. We know that she's alive and survived 3 gunshots to the head because she wrote the story, okay? But that's kind of unusual, right? And why end her essay so abruptly like she did? Well, weren't the gunshots pretty abruptly done to her? And so it makes sense for her to end her essay that way. Her resolution is what she's thinking as the shots are being fired. You see, she did a thing, her autobiographical significance. Why is this important to her? Well, I think we can kind of understand why writing about getting shot in the head is significant to someone's life. Of course it is. But she's remembering, and she's saying, when she hears the 3 gunshots, she's not saying they're gunshots. She's remembering what she saw earlier with the guy severing the heads of the chickens. And so she is, you see what she's doing to herself psychologically in that moment. She is kind of using a defense mechanism because she is about to die. She doesn't, but she's about to. And she is, you see how she's trying to make things better for herself. If I think about those chickens, I don't have to think about what's really happening to me. She doesn't have to tell us that's exactly what she's doing. She shows it by telling us what she's thinking at the time. So that is her resolution. Okay. In my student's essay about the baby girl, about having the baby girl, he really shows the love he has for that child. The moment where he still gives her the football and still intends to teach her how to play football and play catch when she's older. He decided, I can do that with the girl as well as I can do with the boy. It's still a person. I still love her. I don't love her less because she's a girl. I love her more because she's mine. And so a beautiful way to end the story. Okay. Now, what seems to be missing in this essay? In any essay, Who is Malala, my student's essay, or All Over But the Shoutin', the thesis statement, it's implied. it's not directly stated. Most of the time in a formal essay, you're going to see the thesis statement as the last sentence in the introduction. You don't do that here. That's not a dramatic arc structure. Your thesis statement is like your climax. So it's going to come somewhere in the middle to the end of your essay. It's not going to be in the introduction, or you've given away something before you should have. You did not stay in chronological order. So a thesis statement is implied. It's not directly stated. It's really what happens in the climax. Is if you just have to call something a thesis statement in this essay, it's the climax. The other thing that seems to be missing in this essay is the 5-paragraph structure. While there are 5 elements to the dramatic arc, and you would start out by writing each of those elements as one paragraph, after you finish writing those out, just to make sure all the components of the arc are there, but then you got to look at each of those paragraphs and break them down even further into multiple paragraphs. So we don't like the 5-paragraph structure for this essay. It doesn't work for this assignment. Some paragraphs are very, very short, some are a little lengthier, and you make those paragraph shifts as the time changes in the essay. We do not do a traditional introduction, body, conclusion format. That's too formal. This is informal. And the reason we want to do informal writing is informal writing helps the reader see you as a person. And that's important too. So we'll get to formal writing later in the class, but this first essay, you're just telling us who you are and something about yourself. So in order to bring us in as readers, you have to be informal, okay? You have to really let that guard down and invite us in. So you do that by, writing informal language. Now that doesn't mean use bad grammar. You still use good grammar, but you don't really worry about, you can use contractions. You do use dialogue, which we're going to talk about in a few weeks. So you do all of that stuff. But you're just not, but we're not doing this introduction, body, and conclusion essay. We're doing for this essay exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. And that is the end. So I hope you have enjoyed today's lesson. Go forth and write something good. If I haven't gotten a topic from you yet, just make sure you email me that topic. I did ask the class today what they wanted to write on, and they have, so we're talking about that. If you do give me a topic and you decide later on in the week, you know what, I don't think I'm going to write about this, I want to write about something else, just let me know. You're not locked in on anything this week. Really, I just want the hair on my arms to stand up when I'm done reading your essay. So I'm giving you every possible tool I can to get that to happen. So dramatic arc is one of the ways to make that happen. You tell a story without giving too much away before it's time to. So hope y'all have a great day. I apologize for all the issues experienced this morning. I know that must have been frustrating for you. So thank you so much for taking the time to view this, and y'all have a great day. Okay, and then I got to figure out how to stop this recording.